Good evening. The government has been dealt yet another big blow after the courts temporarily stopped the rolling out of the community-based learning initiative. Justice James Makau made the directive after a parent, James Aura, filed a petition seeking to bar the execution of the program. This once again throwing into disarray the learning process for millions of Kenyan students for an initiative that was meant to act as a stopgap measure during this pandemic. Questions abound now on what would be the best way forward, and does it include the reopening of schools soon? This is our conversation on this episode of The Front Row. I am Akisa Wandera. And to be part of this conversation, send in your questions by logging into slido.com, enter event code as hashtag The Front Row. You could also engage with us on Twitter at KTNNewsKE, at Akisa Wandera. Kindly use the hashtag The Front Row. Here now are our panelists for this conversation from now till 9 p.m. We have Honorable Wilson Sosion, who's the Secretary General, the Kenya National Union of Teachers, NAT. He's also a nominated member of Parliament at the National Assembly, and he'll be speaking to us as one of our panelists. We also have Mr. Indimuli Kahi, who's the current president of the Confederation of Principals. He's also the national chairperson of the Kenya Secondary Schools Heads Association and a council member of the International Confederation of Principals. Third, we have Mudheu Kasanga, who's the national chairperson of the Kenya Private Schools Association, and she's also the chairperson of the Education Sector Board at KEPSA and the director at Lukenya Schools and College and trustee at the Lukenya University Trust. And finally, joining us on the front row is Dr. Julius Otundo, a senior lecturer at the Riara University. He is a renowned educationist and education advisor with 25 years of active service in the education industry. He has contributed immensely to curriculum reforms in the country, including the teacher training for new curriculum, and is also a senior lecturer at the Riara University. Gentlemen and lady, thank you for joining us this hour on the front row. Those court orders that were given today by Justice James Makau forming the basis of our conversation, of course throwing the learning process, as I said earlier, on into disarray. And I want us now to speak to lawyer Steve Ogolla to quickly just interpret for us what these orders mean so that we are all on the same graph before we get into our panelists. Do we have Steve Ogolla on phone to speak to us on that? Steve, a very good evening to you. Thank you for joining us here on the front row. The government was set to roll out this community-based learning initiative this week, but this petition seems to temporarily block that. What has the court said? What do parents, teachers, and the public need to know from the court?
Thank you, Sister. Maybe what I would need to alert the public relating to the court case is that the court found that there's a prima facie case, meaning a case that is less and alleged can be established as merited. So the court said that the role of the community-based learning raises significant challenges, both constitutional and human rights questions, and found it fit to injunct the rollout pending the hearing and determination of the case that is before the court.
Right, so then is it that the modalities were wrong and there are other prayers by this particular petitioner? What has the court said?
Well, what it means is this, when you talk about rollout of community-based learning, the organizing principle should be that of universality, which means that community-based learning must be inclusive of all students. No student should be excluded for reasons relating to the basic or what you consider as normative requirements of learning. And this includes availability, accessibility, acceptability, and adaptability. What this means in short is that if this community-based learning is implemented in a chaotic manner, there is no assurance that all the intended students and pupils will benefit from it. There are questions about supervision, There are questions about the organization of the halls where these students are supposed to learn. There are questions about registering the teachers. So in short, what the court is saying that whereas there is a rational justification for rolling out community-based learning, the manner of implementation may be considered as chaotic. And if it is chaotic, it may not serve the purpose for which it has been intended. So that is the challenge that the court has noted and found it fit to injunct the process temporarily. Remember, Christian, the other prayers that in that petition, which have not been allowed by the High Court. Because those prayers are more substantive, because, for instance, the petition is asking the court to compel the Minister of Education to reopen learning, to reopen schools in the traditional sense. And the court has said that matter will be conversed at the full hearing. So what the takeaway is this, and what the public needs to know is this, that parents are raising legitimate concerns around the rollout of community-based learning. They're not saying that community-based learning is not good. They're saying that the manner of implementation is chaotic and unacceptable in the circumstances. That is what parents are saying, and the court has agreed.
Thank you very much for making that clear for us. Steve Ogola, lawyer, joining us, just breaking down the orders that were given today at the High Court by Justice James Makau. Let's get the reactions from our panelists. I'll start with you, Mr. Wilson Sosion, being the Secretary General of the Kenya National Union of Teachers, and perhaps teachers who are going to play a very integral part in this exercise. What are your initial thoughts on the court's decision?
Yeah, thank you. I think first and foremost, we accept that we are facing a pandemic of unprecedented proportions that has taken us to where we are. And I think today the ruling from the court does not surprise some of us, because the conception of community-based learning is a completely new idea that has been misinterpreted by Kenyans to mean that the curriculum was going to be taught in those centers. What the community-based learning, to the best of our understanding, intended to do was to engage in a program of caregiving of the learners and ensuring that they're doing well and they're able to engage in meaningful activities so that they are safe until schools reopen. It is not actually teaching, and there is no curriculum or content to be delivered. Having said that, the hiccups in the manner in which it was rolled may have been wrong. The guidelines were too extensive, and the guidelines, and we cautioned the ministry and TSC, that this is a completely new idea, quite acceptable in the education in crisis. But can we take the regulations through Parliament so that there is public participation, there is acceptability, and people can understand what it is? Unfortunately, it went the way it went. And therefore, the injunction in court today, Kenya being a democratic society with the right to litigate, has been rendered. And we urge Kenyans, we must accept the direction of the court, and any other Kenyan who would wish to defend or give position can enjoy.
Yeah.
Otherwise, for us as a union, we had submitted and accepted that while schools are difficult to reopen, then let us, in our own small way, where we stay, engage in caregiving of learners, but not teaching.
Okay.
We were not prepared for any teaching, and I think that was the direction. But for now, let us comply with the court direction. And this is a lesson to the Ministry and the Teacher Service Commission. in terms of compliance with the law. You cannot develop guidelines and implement.
Right.
Once guidelines or regulations are developed in line with the Statutory Instrument Act of 2013, it must be taken through Parliament to give it the force of law. And anybody litigating will find it very difficult.
And then we'll get into more of that. We'll get deeper into that conversation, and especially the manner in which the ministry has conducted itself this particular season. But let's get reactions from all our guests with the latest developments from the courts. Mr. Ndimuli Kahi, you have been part of the conversations. Those who, some of the teams that were consulted when the government was rolling this out. You're a member of the National COVID-19 Education Committee. When we talk about the implementation of all this, because it's what brought us here, did we foresee perhaps some of the things that we are seeing now and some of the views that the rationale was not up to par, perhaps?
Thank you very much, Akisa, for inviting me on the show. Yes, I want to admit that I was part of the team that was discussing this with the wider members of the stakeholders in education. After some time, it was thought that it would be important to engage with the students, because as adults, we have been discussing and making decisions. The question was, how are the students coping? And the only way in which we could know how the students are coping and what they are doing is to engage them through the community-based learning. As Dr. Sosion has said, we did not envisage a teaching of the curriculum, and that was not part of the concept. It is the interpretation of the general public that felt that the curriculum was going to be taught that threw a spanner into the works. We did not envisage legal issues because parents were part of this, represented through the national chairman of parents, Mr. Mayo. All the unions were involved. I only want to differ slightly with my good friend Sosion when he says that they had mentioned about issues of law, that the guidelines should have gone through Parliament. If this one happened, then it happened away from the bigger consultation of all other stakeholders. It did not come into that meeting. So this was not envisaged. I would say it's unfortunate that the program, somebody had to go to court and the program has been halted. We may not be able to do what was intended, but because it is temporary, I know the Ministry of Education, Teacher Service Commission, and those enjoined in the case will be able to respond to it, and maybe with the time this could be rolled out.
Mudeu, a lot has been said, one on the implementation, whether we were doing it the right way or not. What was your initial reaction when you heard that the courts had halted this process? Were we perhaps looking forward to the rollout?
We have been ready for quite a while as an education sector, and very aware that our children had not got the access to engagement that they perhaps should. Well, they couldn't, because like Mr. Ndimuli and Mr. Sosion have said, that we're facing a situation that we don't have a precedence for. So this is about all the education players doing the best they can to ensure that the children and the students, all of them in general, are sort of in touch with with education of some sort. And this is very important here, because what we are dealing with here is aspects of equity, making sure, and touching this to make sure our children are still safe. And there's been stories in the media about how the education sector has been struggling with various things, and how the current interventions have not reached all the students because of poverty issues, because of network issues. And the government has put its best foot forward to ensure that it does what it can in every means possible. And community-based learning was one cog in a very large wheel of interventions being done. So for me, I think this case was needlessly litigious and actually goes against the very things it says that it is trying to solve. You know, right now it is denying students access to some form of engagement. So whatever it is arguing for, it is actually doing the opposite of that. And from our standpoint as private schools, we don't agree with this case at all. In fact, we think this is just being needlessly litigious. Like Mr. Indimuli and Dr. Sosian have said, stakeholders were engaged. And given the pandemic we are at, we have, so far, the trial runs that have happened, they can't be faulted. They really cannot be faulted. And this case shows that this, whoever is the person behind it, has not really engaged with community-based learning in any depth at all, and looked at, like Mr. Indimuli is saying, the content that is being done. It puts to dreams that teachers are stupid people who cannot know what to do with students. Sure, if you're fully trained teacher and you're given guidelines, and these are guidelines that perhaps this is where perhaps I can mention something. So they don't need to go through Parliament, have been scrutinized. So like Mr. Indimuli says, only delegated regulations need to go through Parliament.
Right.
But otherwise, guidelines, the policy does not need to pass its guidelines through Parliament.
Right.
It has called its stakeholders and
Yes.
it has done.
And we'll have...
So for us as a private sector, we feel that perhaps the person who did this case has not really engaged with the CBL and understood what it's supposed to do, and therefore is actually denying students access to a form of engagement that is one part of a very large bank of things that the government has been doing and the Ministry of Education has been doing since the pandemic broke
And we'll be looking at what was the reasoning really for the parent who went to court. What are some of the prayers that he presented before the court as a petitioner? Let's hear from Dr. Otundo. There's a tweet here from Mwalimu Wandia Njoya, and I'd want you to pick up from there even as you react to this, saying that what Sosion is saying is right, but Kenyans, including the media, equate education to syllabus coverage. In our conversation earlier, you spoke around why we need to teach what students are going to meet perhaps later in life. So then what does that mean for them? Speak to us about that.
Thank you. I want to just explore what my colleagues are talking about. But I want to say, first of all, I want to donate my published paper to the person who is going to court, because the paper on CBL is published. And we need to deal with this scenario in a manner of understanding what community-based learning is all about. Now, starting just to give a little background, in Sierra Leone, when we had Ebola, a bit of community-based learning was carried out, and UNICEF contributed several, even radios, on which students could commute together and listen to radio programs and learn. But having said that, I think education and learning are far beyond just schooling. And through community-based learning, learners would really engage in activities that are meaningful to life. We will not talk about issues about leadership if learners do not practice leadership within the community. The learners need to be able to identify problems within the community and be able to solve those problems through activities they engage in. When you look at the education reforms in Kenya at the moment, about particularly CBC, it's a curriculum that is intended for learners to learn through experience. And the practice of experiential learning would be well practiced during CBL. Now, at the same time, even if the implementation had a challenge, one of the things we must understand that at this particular point in time, we have learners who are somehow engaged online, But we have those ones who are totally not doing anything at the moment. The essence of community-based learning is to ensure that we have all learners from north to east of this country at least participating in activity of engagement. When you go back to even cases that we are hearing about pregnancies of girls, drug and substance abuse, it's all about the fact that learners are not engaged. In fact, there are higher risks at the moment of community transmission within learners if learners continue to stay without engagement. And basically, teachers who are going to implement it in a multi-sectoral approach. And in that essence, therefore, it is about learners beginning to engage in activities that will be meaningful for their future and for their lives, because entrepreneurial skills, agribusiness, and leadership skills, good citizenship, environmental conservation, that really are things that are very important for even any good citizen in this country. Employability skills do not begin from school. They begin from the community. Problem-solving skills don't begin from a school environment. It begins from the community. So this is the ideal time to open learning and to ensure that there is a holistic approach to learning for life other than learning for a certificate, and learning for a grade, learning for completion. Because at the back of my mind, learning should stop when I'm lowered down into the grave. And this can be exercised at this particular point in time. And at the same time, keeping the learners safe. That's what I would say. So for me, in terms of areas of implementation, I think the government has a good purpose and a good reason to have this practice. Then going back to private schools, I am certain they were going to engage in this practice even online. They were going to onboard, I'm very sure, to onboard some of the learners, even on their online platform, still to participate in the activity-based learning, because it is not a curriculum. I want to be very clear. CBL is not a curriculum. It's a mode on which learners are engaged in life skills. If I ask each one of you here and ask everyone who knows his local chief at home, very few of us even know their names and where they live, but somehow we say we understand administration. So this is in essence where students would be engaged in such activities.
Right.
Students being engaged in activities of farming. Yeah, sure, thank you.
All right, thank you. And before we go on a break, Ndebuli, I'd get back to you because there seems to be a lot of information around community-based learning, what it means. We were going to ask parents to surrender their children to these centers, perhaps any open space to go and learn this life skills. But did we give out enough information about what this was going to be about?
Once the decision was agreed upon, the various players moved to first identify what is this that we are going to do. Two, the first thing was also to mobilize and know where the teachers are. And this Teacher Service Commission has been doing, and we've had teachers registering in their nearest sub-county TSC's offices so that they could know how the teachers are distributed. The second phase was now going to involve other players because this was multi-sectoral. We would now have a Ministry of Interior coming in to assist in mobilizing of students and sensitizing of parents. Of course, schools would communicate to parents, informing them that this program is beginning. But the Ministry of Interior would play a much bigger role in identification, mobilizing of students, and even identifying venues where this learning could have taken place. So there is a program that has been going on. Then it would move to now having identified the teachers, now even training them. And we had seen information being passed on the take-home notes that the teachers were going to be taken through in preparation for the rollout of the program. So this was still being rolled out, and then today we get the court ruling. But the program was going to kick off next month, maybe on 2nd, which is a Monday, 2nd of September. So there is a program which is out that was going to be followed, and I'm sure everybody else would have gotten it. The danger that came into it was the assumption that the moment we talk of learning, then we are talking of students having to sit exams, and therefore these students are in different levels of curriculum coverage. How will they now come in? We totally forgot that we were going to look at issues of life skills, values, issues to do with health, issues to do with fitness, because even when you look at international papers, they have indicated that young children between the ages of 14 to 17, very few of them exercise, understand the value of exercise. All these were going to be part and parcel of this teaching. Mm-hmm. We look at issues to do with guidance and counseling, where children are not able to easily communicate with their parents. The other significant adult that they feel safe with is the teacher. And therefore, this opportunity would have been there for students to air the challenges they are going through, mm-hmm. and the teachers, through guidance and counseling, would be able to provide that what they have been mm-hmm. doing while in school. Right. There was totally nothing to do with syllabus. This was totally misinterpreted. That's why maybe there was those fears.
I'll let Mr. Sosion react to what yourself, Ndimuli and Mudeu talked about, whether this needed legislation through Parliament. And of course, it's now being said that it was not the formal curriculum, hence perhaps did not need legislation. Why, from where you sit, and perhaps as a nominated member of Parliament, why do you think this needed to go through this entire legislative process?
Yeah, we are a law-abiding citizen and a country. And as a country, any new program of mammoth nature definitely invites legislation to give it the legitimacy in terms of law. The idea is extremely good, but I think we might have been very hasty in implementing, developing guidelines, and directing everyone to roll out. And I wish to tell my brother Kahi that when I stated clearly that I advised the ministry and TSC, I may not have done it in the plenary, but it's on record, I advised it privately, because that is a very key thing. Number two, legislation is important. We will need community-based learning not today, but tomorrow and in future. It's a new phenomenon. Education in crisis needs to be managed differently. And therefore, rolling out community-based learning, which majority of the population are misinterpreting, may be needed a more careful approach. I remember when the COVID was pronounced, Parliament was recalled to approve certain amendments in Financial Act, Public Finance Management Act, and all others, and approve even the revision of taxation in the country to align to the COVID situation. There is also need not even to approve the guidelines, but even to amend the Education Act, Basic Education Act, so that within the Act, there is a provision of operation of community-based learning. And once that is done, because in our Constitution, public participation is a provision as one of the key values. And I believe very strongly as a legislator that this is a matter that Parliament is safe to discuss, to debate, to approve, to correct, to amend. Because the legislature is the House of Representatives of the people of Kenya. And the same people who have not understood the concept of CBL have actually moved to court. But if this matter was taken through the legislature, and we must use the legislature, it exists for the people, to do the work for the people for free. I'm so convinced that if this matter was brought as an amendment to the Basic Education Act to customize the new phenomenon, it would have been passed very unanimously if parliamentarians were made to understand.
Right.
And as for the guidelines, we cannot dismiss the role of Parliament that maybe is only restricted to statute laws and regulations. Even guidelines of this magnitude, just discussing and taking it through even the Education Committee and relevant arms of the House is critical, so that the respective stakeholders can be taken through. Kai has explained exactly the concept. All of us, we understand, but let us not assume that everyone knows. The biggest lacuna in this concept is not because it is a bad thing. It's the best idea. It must be implemented. And it was not even compulsory for teachers. It is voluntary. It's about caregiving. It's pedagogy or pedagogues, teachers doing the pedagogue work that we are doing from the beginning, taking care of learners, but not delivering the curriculum. But you see, we've done it in haste, and I think all is not lost. We need to amend the Basic Education Act to accommodate CBL in our statute law, and also the guidelines. The guidelines must of necessity be taken through Parliament, so that it goes through a process of public participation and consultation.
Right. We have done this in haste, but all is not lost. I'd like to pick it up from there when we get back from the break. You're watching The Front Row. Remember, this is your show too. A lot of interaction and engagement on Twitter. I'll be reading out some of your thoughts. And one, of course, is asking, can our panelists please disambiguate between curriculum and syllabus? Keep those questions coming. Our panel of experts will be responding to a number of them. The hashtag to use is The Front Row. You can as well log on to slido.com. The event code is The Front Row. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back with more. Stay with us.